She has no idea what she signed, my uncle said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. Which, as of that morning, he believed he did. She was grieving. She was overwhelmed. Frankly, she was not in a position to be making financial decisions of any kind. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the mediator, at the attorneys, at my two cousins he'd planted in the seats behind him like props. He'd even brought my aunt, who sat there clutching a rosary she only pulls out for funerals and courtrooms. I looked at my watch. 11 minutes. That's how long I estimated before the whole thing unraveled. Have you ever sat in a room while someone you trusted built a case against your sanity? Drop a yes in the comments. I want to know how many of us have survived this exact moment. My uncle's name is Robert. He is 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who calls waitresses sweetheart and tips 12%. After my father died 18 months ago, he became the executor of the estate, and for 18 months I let him believe he was also in control of me. The room we were in wasn't a courtroom, it was a private mediation suite on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Chicago, all glass and gray carpet and the kind of silence that costs $400 an hour. My uncle had requested the mediation. He told his attorney it was to reach an amicable resolution regarding the distribution of my father's estate. He told my cousins he was doing it to protect the family. What he hadn't told anyone was that he'd already been moving money for 8 months. My father built a small logistics company over 30 years, nothing flashy. Refrigerated trucking, mostly produce pharmaceuticals, that kind of thing. When he died, the company was worth about $4 million. The estate, between the business equity and his personal assets, was closer to 6.5. He left everything in the trust. My uncle Robert was named executor. I was named sole beneficiary. I was 29. My uncle decided that was a problem. The week after the funeral, he sat me down at my father's kitchen table, my kitchen table now, technically, and told me I needed to let the adults handle this. I was drowning in grief. I hadn't slept in 4 days. He put a stack of documents in front of me and told me it was routine estate administration. I signed where the tabs were. I didn't read a single page. That was the mistake that started everything. The mediation had been his idea. He'd sent a formal letter through his attorney 3 weeks ago requesting that I acknowledge his management decisions regarding the trust and agree to a reduced distribution schedule, meaning he would control the releases, the timing, and the amounts. His attorney framed it as protecting me from making impulsive decisions with a large inheritance. What it actually was a cage. When his attorney finished the opening statement, my uncle smiled at me from across the table. The same smile he used at Christmas when he was winning at cards. Patient. Certain. He'd been waiting for this for 1.5 years, and he thought he'd finally gotten me cornered. I smoothed the front of my jacket and folded my hands on the table. I didn't say anything yet. This is something I want to talk about because I think people misunderstand what silence looks like from the outside. My uncle thought I was scared. My cousins probably thought I was about to cry. The mediator had this careful, neutral expression that I'd seen on therapists and school counselors, the look of someone bracing for tears. But I wasn't scared. I was counting. 18 months ago, after I signed those documents at the kitchen table, something made me take photos of them with my phone before my uncle gathered them up. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Grief does strange things to your attention. You notice small things. The way his hand moved too quickly when he collected the pages. The way he folded them before I could look back at them. That night, I sent the photos to an attorney I found through my company's employee assistance program. Her name is Adrienne, and she told me within 48 hours that I had signed a document granting my uncle broad discretionary authority over trust distributions, authority that went significantly beyond what the trust instrument itself allowed. I didn't call my uncle. I didn't confront him. I didn't freeze the accounts. I hired a forensic accountant instead, and I waited. My client would like to address the documentation directly, my attorney said. Her name was Adrienne, and she had the kind of stillness that made other attorneys nervous. I'd noticed my uncle's lawyer glancing at her twice since we sat down. Of course, the mediator said. I opened the folder in front of me, not dramatically. Just opened it the way you'd open a menu. I want to start by confirming that my uncle is correct about one thing, I said. A significant amount of money has moved through the trust in the last 18 months, roughly $840,000 across multiple transfers. My uncle nodded, slowly, satisfied. That was the number he'd expected me to not know. "I'd like to show you where it went," I said. The forensic accountant's report was 47 pages. I didn't hand all of it over at once. I slid the first summary page across the table to the mediator and kept talking. The money hadn't gone to estate expenses. It hadn't gone to taxes or legal fees or business operating costs, all things my uncle had claimed in his informal accounting. It had gone to 3 places: a property in Arizona, titled in my uncle's wife's maiden name; a home renovation on my uncle's house in Naperville, paid through a vendor my uncle's company happened to own; and a series of transfers to an LLC registered in Delaware that listed my uncle's college roommate as its sole member. That LLC had then transferred funds to an account my uncle's name appeared on as a secondary signatory. He was good, I'll give him that. He'd layered it carefully, but he'd made one mistake that most people who steal from family make. He assumed the person he was stealing from would never actually look. My uncle's attorney put a hand on the table. "Those allegations are documented," I said. "The wire records are in the 2nd tab. The property deed is in the 3rd. The LLC registration is in the 4th. My uncle's face had gone the color of old concrete. He leaned over to his attorney and whispered something. His attorney didn't look reassured. The mediator flipped to the 2nd tab. My cousin, the older one, the one who'd always been my uncle's favorite, shifted in his seat and looked at the table. "The trust document she signed?" my uncle said suddenly. His voice had changed, flatter, more careful. "It gives me discretionary authority. Every one of those transactions was within my authority as executor." This was the moment I had been waiting for. Because he was partially right, the document I'd signed gave him broad authority, and for 8 months I'd sat with Adrienne and her forensic accountant and a very patient attorney who specialized in fiduciary litigation, and we had mapped out exactly where that authority ended. Discretionary authority over distributions does not cover self-dealing. It does not cover transactions in which the executor has a direct or indirect personal financial interest. It does not cover a Delaware LLC that traces back to the executor's own accounts. Under Illinois trust law, each of those transactions was a breach of fiduciary duty. And because the total exceeded the threshold that triggers the Illinois financial exploitation of an elderly or disabled person statute, my father's estate was considered a protected trust. Several of those transfers crossed into criminal territory. I didn't say all of that. Adrienne said most of it in the precise, unhurried way she had. I just watched my uncle's face. There's a specific look a person gets when they realize the thing they thought was a weapon is actually a trap. It's not anger, exactly. It's more like vertigo. Like the floor tilted slightly, and they're not sure how to stand anymore. My uncle got that look at about the 4-minute mark of Adrienne's summary. "She knew about this," he said, pointing at me. His voice was thin. "She's known for months, and she said nothing. She let it happen." "Yes," I said. "That's entrapment. It's documentation," Adrienne said. "My client was advised by counsel before any action was taken. Every decision was made in consultation with a licensed attorney and in compliance with Illinois law. What your client did with the access he was given is a matter of record." My uncle looked at me then, really looked at me. I think it was the first time since my father's funeral that he'd actually seen me, not the grieving 29-year-old he'd decided was manageable. I kept my expression neutral, not cold, just still. Here's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. You learn to be comfortable being invisible. I had watched my uncle run holiday dinners like a chairman running a board meeting. I had watched him talk over my father, over my mother before she passed, over every woman at every table. He had an opinion about my college major. He had opinions about my apartment, my car, my choice of career. He once told me at Thanksgiving that data analytics was not a real job for someone with your potential. I was, at the time, 3 months into a position at a supply chain risk firm where I was making more than he'd made the entire previous year. I didn't correct him. I just passed the sweet potatoes. That patience, 18 months of it, a lifetime of it, was not weakness. It was preparation. "I want to talk about what happens next," I said. My uncle straightened in his chair. His attorney put a hand on his arm. "You have 2 options," I said. I was looking at my uncle, not at anyone else. "The first option is that you acknowledge the breach, agreed a full restitution of the $840,000 plus interest calculated from the date of each transfer, resign as executor immediately, and cooperate with the appointment of a professional trust company to manage the estate going forward. In exchange, we do not pursue criminal referral. The room was very quiet. The second option, I said, is that we adjourn this mediation and I file a formal complaint with the Illinois Attorney General's office this afternoon. I've already drafted it. It's sitting in my attorney's outbox, ready to send. My uncle opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I also want you to know, I said, and this was the part I had thought about the most, the part I had rehearsed alone in my car at 6 a.m. 3 days ago, that I loved your brother. My father trusted you. He named you executor because he thought you would take care of his family. What you did with that trust is something I have had to sit with for a very long time. I did not cry. I had cried plenty, not here. But this is not a family conversation anymore. It stopped being at the day you moved the first dollar. My uncle's attorney leaned over and whispered something. My uncle shook his head once, sharp, dismissive. Then he looked at the folder on the table. He looked at the tabs, second, third, fourth, on and on. He looked at Adrian, who was watching him with the patience of someone who has done this many times before. He looked at his son, the older cousin, who was still looking at the table. I think that was the moment he understood that his son had known I was not what he thought I was. I think he understood that the room had already made its judgment, and it was not the one he'd walked in expecting. What are the terms of the restitution schedule? His attorney asked. Adrian opened her own folder. I looked at my watch again. 9 minutes. I had been off by 2. The agreement took another 3 hours to negotiate in detail. My uncle signed it at 4:37 in the afternoon. He did not look at me when he signed. His hand was steady, which surprised me. I had expected shaking, but I think by then he was just tired. He resigned as executor the following week. A trust company in Chicago took over. They completed a full audit within 30 days, which turned up an additional $42,000 in transfers I hadn't caught. Smaller ones, scattered over the first 6 months, before my uncle had gotten comfortable enough to move larger amounts. The total restitution came to $914,000. My uncle made the first payment from the sale of the Arizona property. I found out about that from the attorney, not from him. We have not spoken since the mediation. I don't expect we will. His son, my older cousin, sent me a text message about 3 weeks later. It said, I didn't know the extent of it. I want you to know that. I read it twice. I didn't respond. I'm not sure what I would say. Maybe someday. Not yet. The estate is being managed properly now. The company my father built is being evaluated for sale by a broker he would have liked. Practical, no nonsense, the kind of person my father respected. I am involved in every decision. I read every document before I sign it. I will read every document for the rest of my life. I kept my father's watch. It's a simple one, a Seiko he bought himself in 1987, the year he started the business. It runs a little fast. Every morning when I put it on, I think about him building something for 30 years so that the people he loved would be taken care of. I think about how he trusted the wrong person. I think about how I didn't. There's something people don't tell you about being wronged by family. They don't tell you that the grief and the anger live in the same place, so tangled together you can't always tell which one you're feeling. They don't tell you that winning doesn't fix the original loss, that sitting across a table from your uncle and watching his certainty collapse doesn't bring your father back, doesn't undo the 1.5 years of watching your inheritance disappear while you built your case one document at a time. What it does is give you the estate your father meant you to have. It gives you the company, the assets, the future he worked for. It gives you the knowledge that you were not manageable, that you were not overwhelmed, that you were not the version of yourself other people decided you were when you were too exhausted to argue. My uncle thought grief had made me soft. He was wrong. Grief had made me meticulous. Some people, when they realize they've underestimated you, feel embarrassed. Some feel angry. My uncle, I think, felt something closer to disbelief. Like he'd been playing chess against someone he assumed was playing checkers, and only at the end realized they'd been playing the whole time. I don't know if he's learned anything. Probably not. People like him rarely do. But I know something he doesn't. I know that the business my father built is still standing. I know the warehouse in Joliet still has his name on the door. I know that the drivers who worked for him for 20 years still have their jobs, and that I intend to keep it that way for as long as it makes sense, because my father cared about those people and so do I. I know that the first Christmas after all of this settled, I sat in my father's house, my house, and I put on the old records he used to play, and I made his cornbread recipe, the one he never wrote down that I had to reconstruct from memory and 3 failed attempts. And I sat at his kitchen table, and I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I could breathe. Not because justice is a cure, it isn't. But because I didn't let someone rewrite the ending of my father's story. I held the pen, and when the time came, I used it. Some things you don't wait to be given. You build them in the quiet, document by document, tab by tab, until the morning comes when you sit across a table and open a folder, and the only thing left to do is watch someone realize how long you've been ready. I still think about the moment my uncle's attorney asked about the restitution schedule, not because it felt like winning. It didn't, not exactly, but because of how quiet the room got. 18 months of waiting, and it ended with a question about payment terms. That's how these things actually end, not with a dramatic speech, just paperwork and silence, and someone finally asking the practical question. My father used to say that people reveal themselves when they think no one is paying attention. He said it about drivers in parking lots, about how people treat servers at restaurants, about small things. I don't think he knew he was also describing his own brother. But he was right. Robert revealed himself the night he collected those documents too quickly. I was paying attention. I just didn't know yet what I was seeing. Here's what I've come to believe, sitting with all of it. The outcome wasn't luck. It wasn't even just strategy. It was the result of 3 things working together over a long time, and I think about all 3 of them now when I'm tempted to take shortcuts or give up. The first is doing right by people even when it costs you something. I could have made noise early. I could have confronted my uncle at Thanksgiving, aired it out at Christmas, let the family drama play out the way it usually does in these situations, loud and unresolved. Instead, I chose to do this the right way, through counsel, through documentation, through a process that protected not just me, but the people who worked for my father's company for 20 years. Integrity isn't a feeling. It's a series of choices made when the easier choice is right there in front of you. The second is thinking clearly when everything in you wants to react. Grief is not a good advisor. I know that now. The night after the funeral, I was not okay. I was not in a position to make decisions. But somewhere underneath the fog, something small and practical made me photograph those documents. That instinct to slow down, to look carefully, to consult someone who knew more than I did, that's what built the case. Not brilliance. Just the discipline to think before acting and then to keep thinking for 18 months straight. The third is the hardest one to talk about because it sounds like something you'd see on a motivational poster, and I've never liked those. But it's just true. I didn't quit. There were months where I wasn't sure the case would hold. There were nights I sat with the forensic accountant's reports and felt nothing but exhausted and sad and furious in equal measure. There were moments I almost called my uncle just to end it, to take whatever partial settlement he might have offered, to stop carrying the weight of it. I didn't, not because I'm particularly strong. Because I kept thinking about my father's name on that warehouse door, and I wasn't willing to let someone rewrite what that name meant. The thing about consequences is that they're not always immediate. Robert didn't lose everything the day he moved the first dollar. He lost it slowly, transaction by transaction, across 18 months, because he never stopped to ask whether the person he was stealing from was actually paying attention. She was. I was. And I want you to know, whoever you are watching this, wherever you are in whatever situation you're in, that the quiet ones are often the most prepared. The person who isn't yelling is sometimes the one who has already won. Not always, but sometimes, and sometimes that's enough to hold on to when it feels like holding on is the hardest thing in the world.